Can anyone who has suffered at the hands of another ever look that person in the eye and truly say that all is forgiven? On this day, it is a question worth pondering. Our Sunday morning cover story is reported now by Martha Teichner.
Forgive his executioners. That's what Jesus asked of God as he was dying on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, he said. With Christ's death and the celebration of his resurrection today on Easter, the world's 2 billion-plus Christians are reminded of a teaching central to their faith, that if God can forgive the worst of sins, so can they.
The central redemption story, the Easter story in our tradition of Christ's movement from victim to victor, is a model of how we can respond to tragedy in our own lives. We have to stand
fine in theory, as described by the Reverend Chloe Breyer, an Episcopal priest in New York City, but hard in practice. Ask the victims of Bernie Madoff's multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme.
I want his family to feel the pain that they've inflicted on our family.
Are there wrongs that are unforgivable? The Nazi death camps during the Holocaust? Are the families who lost loved ones on 9/11 ready to forgive the hijackers? Caught up in their anguish, most Americans never even heard about this horrific car accident a few days after the Twin Towers tragedy, about the drunk driver who killed 8 members of the University of Wyoming cross-country team.
It was such a severe crash that the bodies of the boys were strung out through that borrow ditch for 100 yards. He had actually carried some of them on his bumper.
Carrie Shatto's son Shane was one of the dead runners.
I was really proud about his uniform. To have your son on a university team is
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Shatto put up this cross with 8 names on it at the crash site.
He died there on the highway alone without me.
Debbie McClelland lost her son Morgan.
You know, I couldn't say goodbye. That bothered me for quite a while. And then I thought about it, and I thought how afraid he must have been, you know, because you're a mom.
Clint Haskins says he has no memory of that night. A 21-year-old senior at the University of Wyoming, on the rodeo team, he'd been drinking for hours, at a party, then a bar. He's serving a 14 to 20-year sentence for 8 counts of vehicular homicide. Debbie McClelland has forgiven him. Carrie Shatto has not.
I just can't live my life that way. I cannot live my life with a grudge and with hate and anger in my heart. I just can't.
If I forgive him, then my son died for nothing. And I guess that's the part that drives me. I don't want these 8 boys to die for nothing.
As his son was, Shatto is a volunteer fireman. He's worked tirelessly against drunk driving. He's on committees, gives talks. So does Debbie McClelland.
There is no safe way to drink and drive.
But look at how she's done it.
I'm going to quit now, and I'm going to turn this over to Clint.
She and Clint Haskins first appeared together in 2004.
There hasn't been a single day since this happened that I don't realize what I'm responsible for.
The sight of the 2 of them embracing shocked and angered the other parents. McClelland is unapologetic.
I'm really angry about a lot of things, and I'm angry that I don't have my child. But I have to deal with this, and I have to deal with it how I can, and I can't deal with it without forgiving.
Clint Haskins is expected to come up for parole in another couple of years. And yes, Debbie McClelland, Morgan's mother, and Carrie Shatto, Shane's father, disagree over whether the person who took their sons' lives should go free.
I want him to have a life. You know, my son has no life. I want Clint to have a life. I want him to have a wife and children and a family.
He gets out someday, and he gets to have a family, and he gets to see his parents again. But my son will never get any of that. I don't have the forgiveness. It's just not in my heart to do that.
Carrie Shatto and Debbie McClelland. How could they come to opposite conclusions? It seems human beings are driven by two very different impulses at the same time.
Revenge and forgiveness are like two sides of the coin.
Michael McCullough is a psychology professor at the University of Miami.
We know absolutely that revenge is this universal feature of human nature. But we also now know that there is a natural, evolved capacity to forgive that also exists in every human mind on the planet.
We're taught that revenge is like a disease, but in his recent book, McCullough argues otherwise.
This is one of the real surprises from neuroscience over the last decade. Revenge is not coming from some sick, demented, ill part of the brain. The brain system that produces revenge is the same system we use when we're looking for something to eat when we're hungry.
Desire.
Desire. It's the desire to satisfy a craving.
Forgiveness involves the part of the brain associated with empathy.
So forgiveness is born in part of the experience of somebody else's pain. It doesn't feel very good to people to seek revenge against people they feel sorry for.
When somebody harms us, we get upset emotionally and physically. We might hunger for revenge, but forgiveness is better for our health.
You want to feel better. Revenge can do that in the short term, but it's kind of like junk food, really, in terms of happiness. In the long term, what forgiveness does is it restores valuable relationships. And that has a long-term sort of satisfying quality to it.
There's the old saying that forgiveness is divine.
In Christianity, forgiveness is a central tenet.
Which brings us back to religion.
Forgiveness is central to Judaism, to the Jewish tradition.
The Interfaith Council of New York arranged this conversation with representatives of 4 different faiths.
The most frequent attributes of God mentioned in the Holy Quran is His mercy and forgiveness.
In a way, the word forgiveness is a smaller part in Buddhism.
Lama Pema Wangdak talks about forgiveness as part of a quest toward a perfect, timeless principle of patience.
Part because we have nothing to forgive to anybody. Part because we don't see the enemy outside. We see enemy inside of us.
There have been holy wars in the name of religious faith for centuries. How can the same religions that promote forgiveness also condone and take part in war?
Those who involved in the revenge, those who involved in the wars, are people who try to follow religions, but oftentimes they fail. Some of those are using Islam as justification for their own purposes, and I think Bin Laden in this way is one of those.
But for Imam Shamsi Ali, being forgiving doesn't mean being a doormat.
Forgiveness doesn't mean for us to be oppressed, because we are human beings and we are realistic that we have that right to defend.
We do not have religiously sanctioned wars.
But in Tibet last year, Buddhist monks rioted during protests against China, demonstrating a classic dilemma.
If you're peaceful and kind to the person who is not kind and always harmful to you, are you encouraging him or her? So the risk is always there, whether you do it in a peaceful way or the harmful way. Again, we go back to the principle. We just do the right thing.
I want to mention one quick example from Passover.
Rabbi Simcha Weintraub.
There's a point in the traditional Seder when we turn to God and we say, pour out your wrath against those nations that have come after us. It hands it over to God.
Vengeance left to God means forgiveness is our responsibility. The Reverend Chloe Breyer.
Don't come asking God for forgiveness. Don't expect to be reconciled unless you have been reconciled between the brother or the sister that you have offended.
Jesus Christ is risen today. Hallelujah.
In in the Lord's Prayer we say, forgive us our trespasses in the old translation, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
But as Debbie McClelland and Carrie Shadow know only too well, yes, that's fine in theory, but hard in practice. Easter is all about giving us hope and the will to keep trying.